Look at the back of your hand. Look at the skin stretched over your knuckles, the faint tracery of veins beneath, the specific shade, the color you've known your whole life. In your bathroom mirror this morning, that was the face looking back. You probably didn't think about it. It's just you. It's just your skin. But stretch your arm out. Turn your hand over. Look at your inner wrist, the soft, sensitive underside. It's lighter, isn't it? Paler. A different color than the back of your hand, which has spent a lifetime facing the sun. That difference, that gradient on your own body, between the skin that's seen the light and the skin that's been protected, is a living fossil. It's a tiny, personal echo of a planet-altering journey your ancestors took. A journey that didn't just change the world. It physically rewrote the instruction manual for human skin. And it's the reason you look the way you do today. Because here is the simple, startling fact of human history. For the vast majority of our existence, for hundreds of thousands of years, every single one of your direct ancestors had dark skin. Deeply pigmented, rich, protective, dark skin. If you could line them all up, from the earliest Homo sapiens in Africa, all the way up to about maybe 50,000 years ago, they would share this one profound trait. It was the human default, the universal standard. You are, at this very moment, sitting in a room that your ancient body was never designed to see. You are living in a light environment that is a profound historical anomaly. And the story of how that changed, the story of why some human populations, your ancestors among them, went from that deep ancestral pigmentation to the lighter skin you see on your own wrists, is not a story of race. It's not a story of superiority or inferiority. It is a bone-deep, vitamin-starved, life-or-death story of survival at the ragged edge of the world. It's a story written not in culture, but in calcium, in sunlight, and in the desperate, silent plea of a newborn skeleton trying to form in a sunless land. And it all starts with a trade-off. A brutal, non-negotiable trade-off that every single one of your ancestors, for generation after generation, had to navigate with their very bodies. Skin is your largest organ. It's your suit of armor against the world. And its primary job, its ancient, fundamental purpose, is to be a barrier, to keep the outside out and the inside in. For our earliest ancestors in the intense, vertical sunlight of equatorial Africa, the greatest threat from the outside was radiation. Ultraviolet radiation, specifically UVB and UVA rays from the sun that slice right through the atmosphere and bombard the earth. In small doses, UVB is crucial. It's the key that unlocks vitamin D production in your skin. But in the relentless, year-round doses of the African savanna, UVB is a weapon. It shreds DNA. It causes mutations. It destroys folate, a B vitamin that is absolutely critical for one thing above all else: reproductive success. Folate is the bedrock of healthy sperm development in men. For women, it is the essential ingredient for preventing catastrophic neural tube defects in developing embryos, malformations of the brain and spine that are incompatible with life. So the evolutionary equation was stark and simple. Too much sun meant destroyed folate. Destroyed folate meant no viable children. Your lineage ended. Full stop. Melanin, the dense, dark pigment that gives skin its color, is nature's perfect sunscreen. It's a complex polymer that forms a physical shield around the nuclei of your skin cells, absorbing and scattering that incoming UV radiation before it can reach the delicate DNA inside. The more melanin, the more protection. For our species' first 200,000 plus years, under that African sun, dark skin wasn't just an adaptation. It was a prerequisite for existence. It was the biological price of admission for having a future. Every single person who successfully passed their genes on to the next generation did so, because their skin provided that crucial folate shield. If even one of your direct ancestors in that long chain back to Africa had lacked this protection, if their skin had been lighter, the folate in their bloodstream would have been compromised. That ancestral pregnancy might have failed. That child might never have been born. And you, sitting here, reading this, would simply not exist. That was the stable, balanced state of humanity for millennia. Dark skin, equatorial sun, protected folate, survival. Then we moved. Some groups of Homo sapiens began to wander, not for curiosity, but for survival, following prey, seeking new resources, perhaps fleeing conflict or climatic shifts. They walked north and east, out of the cradle of Africa, into the vast, unfamiliar landscapes of Asia and Europe. And with every step northward, They walked into a different world of light. The angle of the sun changed. It hung lower in the sky, its rays striking the atmosphere at a shallower angle, passing through more of that protective atmospheric blanket. And then, they encountered the seasons, not just the wet and dry cycles of the tropics, but profound, crushing seasonal change. Winters, months where the sun hung feeble and low, where days shrunk to a few dim hours, where the very concept of strong, direct sunlight vanished for a quarter of the year. Your ancestors in these new lands faced a world utterly alien to their biology. They were tropical apes in furs, shivering in the snow. And here, the ancient trade-off flipped. In Africa, the problem was too much UVB. In the north, the problem became too little. Because remember that other crucial function of UVB. It synthesizes vitamin D in your skin. Vitamin D is not just a vitamin. It's a hormone, a master regulator of your body's ability to absorb calcium from your food. No calcium absorption, no strong bones. No strong bones in an ice age world of mammoth hunts and predator evasion. Quick, brutal death. But for women, it was even more specific and even more dire. No calcium absorption meant a pelvis that could deform, that could fracture under the strain of pregnancy and childbirth. It meant newborns with soft, malformed skulls and weak, rubbery ribs. A condition called rickets, a death sentence in a world of physical hardship. The equation had reversed. Now, the threat wasn't too much sun destroying folate. It was too little sun preventing vitamin D production. The very adaptation that had guaranteed survival in Africa, that superb, dark, melanin-rich sunscreen, was now a liability in the gloom of a northern European winter. It was blocking the already scarce, desperately needed UVB rays. Under that dark skin, in those long winters, vitamin D production would have plummeted to near zero. So the people who lived, and whose children lived, were the ones whose bodies began to bend the rules. Through random genetic mutation, slight variations in skin pigmentation arose. In Africa, these lighter variants would have been swiftly weeded out by the sun's fury. But here, in the north, they conferred a desperate advantage. A person with slightly lighter skin could soak up a few more precious photons of that weak winter UVB. They could synthesize a tiny bit more vitamin D. That tiny bit could mean the difference between a strong skeleton and a brittle one, between surviving a childbirth and not, between a child reaching adulthood and dying in infancy. This was evolution in its rawest, most brutal form. It was not a choice. It was a slow, grinding, generational filtration. The individuals whose genetic lottery ticket gave them a physiological edge, in this new, sun-starved environment lived a little longer, reproduced a little more successfully. And over thousands of years, across hundreds of generations, the average skin tone of these isolated populations shifted from dark to lighter. It was a biological response to a radiative crisis, a slow turning of the body's dial toward the light. But this is where the story gets strange. Because if it were just a simple matter of north equals less sun, therefore lighter skin, the global map of skin color would be a perfect, smooth gradient from the equator to the poles, a beautiful, logical suntan map of the world. It isn't. Look at a globe. The Inuit peoples of the Arctic Circle have skin tones that are often darker than one might expect for living. At the very top of the world, indigenous populations in the high altitude, intensely sunny Andes of South America can have lighter skin than some groups in cloudier, lower latitude Europe. The puzzle is full of glaring, confusing exceptions. Something else is going on. Something beyond just latitude and sunlight. The simple, intuitive explanation we just built, the one about vitamin D and survival, is true, but it's incomplete. It's the engine, but not the whole machine. Because when scientists started digging into the genetics, when they began to peel back the layers of this story written in our DNA, they found something shocking. The loss of skin pigmentation didn't happen once. It didn't follow a single path. It happened again and again and again in different groups at different times for reasons that were similar but not identical. And the mechanism, the actual genetic switches that were flipped to turn down the melanin, were not the same. We've been following one thread, the desperate need for vitamin D in the sun-deprived north. But to truly understand why your skin looks the way it does, we have to follow another thread entirely. A thread that leads us to a different kind of survival crisis. Not in the frozen tundra, but in the damp, fertile, and deceptively dangerous forests of a world coming out of an ice age. Because the real twist in this story isn't about the lack of something. It's about the sudden, overwhelming abundance of something else in the human diet, something that would force the human body to make another brutal calculation and change the color of our skin forever. Now, take a breath and feel your own ribs expand. Feel the solid cage of bone beneath your skin and muscle. It's there, holding you up, protecting your heart, allowing you to breathe. You built that skeleton, piece by piece, when you were a child, and you built it out of the food you ate. Every glass of milk, every bite of cheese, every piece of fish you were told was good for your bones, was providing the raw materials, calcium, and the vitamin D needed to use it. For your northern ancestors in that sun-starved world, that dietary path to calcium was a dead end. The land offered almost nothing, so their bodies became the factory, using sunlight to create the key. But follow that other thread of your ancestry now, not north into the snow, but east, out of Africa, along coastlines and river valleys, into the vast, sprawling continents of Asia. These ancestors walked into a different kind of challenge. The sunlight here, in places like what we now call China, India, Southeast Asia, was often strong, stronger than in the high latitudes of Europe. And yet, over thousands of years, many of these populations also developed lighter skin tones, not always as light as some in the far north, but distinctly lighter than the ancestral African baseline. The vitamin D theory alone stumbles here. The sun was often plentiful. So what was the crisis? The crisis was hiding in the very thing that promised survival, the Neolithic Revolution, the invention of farming. For nearly all of human history, we were hunters and gatherers. Our diets were wildly varied, opportunistic, and heavy in meat and foraged plants. Then, starting around 12,000 years ago in a few parts of the world, humans began to do the unthinkable. They took control. They planted seeds. They domesticated grains like wheat, barley, and rice. They domesticated animals. This was humanity's greatest gamble, and it worked. It created food surplus, which led to villages, then cities, then everything you see around you right now. But for the individual human body, this new diet was a catastrophic downgrade. Imagine the shift. Your ancestors go from a protein-rich, varied diet of game meat, fish, fruits, tubers, and nuts, to a diet where 70, 80, sometimes 90% of their calories come from a single domesticated grain. For vast populations across Asia, that grain was rice. In the Fertile Crescent, it was wheat and barley. These grains are calorie-dense. They feed civilizations. But they are nutritional bandits. And they commit their robbery in two ways. First, they are very poor sources of calcium, and the preformed vitamin D found in animal products like fatty fish, liver, and eggs. A bowl of rice has virtually none. So already, the dietary path to strong bones was weakening, just as it had for the northern hunters. But the second, more insidious effect is what scientists call the anti-nutrient problem. Grains like wheat and rice, in their raw, unprocessed state, contain compounds like phytates. Phytates are a plant's defense mechanism, and in the human gut, they perform a kind of molecular kidnapping. They bind fiercely to minerals, especially zinc, iron, and crucially, calcium, and prevent your body from absorbing them. They escort these vital minerals right out of you. So your farming ancestor is now in a perfect, silent storm. They are living in settled, often crowded communities where infectious diseases are new and rampant, a stress on the body that increases the need for nutrients. They are working brutally hard in the fields from dawn till dusk. They are eating a diet overwhelmingly composed of a food that not only fails to provide enough calcium, but actively steals the little calcium they get from other sources. Their children, whose growing bones demand a river of calcium, are eating this same food. Their bodies were facing a calcium famine in the midst of a calorie feast. And this is where the story twists back to your skin. Remember the trade-off. In the north, the threat was a lack of UVB to make vitamin D. So lighter skin evolved to capture every possible photon. In these farming societies, the threat was different, but the biochemical endpoint was the same: catastrophic calcium deficiency. Without enough calcium, you don't get rickets immediately. You get something slower and more pervasive: weaker bones, more fractures, higher maternal and infant mortality during childbirth. The evolutionary pressure was the same: strong skeletons or death. But the cause was not a lack of sun. It was a lack of bioavailable calcium in the diet, caused by the very food that was sustaining the population. So what could the body do? It couldn't change the phytates in the wheat. It couldn't magically make rice rich in calcium, but it could optimize the one other pathway it had to secure this essential mineral. It could become hyper-efficient at making vitamin D from whatever sunlight was available. Because with more vitamin D, you can extract every last microgram of calcium from that impoverished, grain-heavy diet. And how do you become more efficient at making vitamin D? You let more UVB light into your skin. You reduce the melanin sunscreen. Again, the individuals with random mutations for lighter pigmentation, mutations that would have been meaningless or even detrimental in earlier times, now had that desperate advantage. In the rice paddies of the Yangtze or the wheat fields of the Euphrates, they could synthesize vitamin D more effectively from the same amount of sun. They could wrestle a little more calcium from their food. That fractional advantage, over generations, meant more surviving children. This is the shocking, repeated pattern geneticists found. The evolution of lighter skin in Asian populations appears to be largely independent from the evolution of lighter skin in European populations. They happened at different times, under different environmental pressures, and, most stunningly, they were achieved by flipping different genetic switches. In Europeans, key mutations occurred in a gene called SLC24A5, a major regulator of melanin production. That variant is virtually absent in East Asians. Instead, East Asian skin lightening is strongly associated with changes in a different gene entirely, called OCA2, and others like MC1R. They took different roads to a similar destination. Your skin, then, is not just a map of how much sun your ancestors got. It is a living record of what they ate and the brutal nutritional compromises they had to make to survive. It is a document of the agricultural revolution written on your body. The bone-deep plea for calcium that shaped northern hunters also shaped Asian farmers. Converging from different directions on the same biological solution. Turn down the pigment, let the light in. But the story isn't even that clean. Because nature is messy, and evolution is a tinkerer, not an engineer. Consider the Inuit again, living under the weak Arctic sun with darker skin. The vitamin D theory would predict they should be the lightest of all. But they aren't, and the reason shatters the simplicity completely. Their traditional diet is among the richest in the world in preformed vitamin D. Whale blubber, seal liver, fatty fish. These are overflowing with the vitamin. They didn't need to synthesize it in their skin, so there was no pressure to lose their protective melanin. Their skin remained dark, protected against the fierce UV reflection off ice and snow, while their diet solved the calcium problem for them. Now look at the indigenous peoples of the Andes, at high altitude. The sun there is intense. Thinner atmosphere means less filtering of UV rays. The folate-destroying danger is high. Yet, many populations have lighter skin than expected. Why? Possibly because at altitude, the need for protection against folate destruction and the need for vitamin D production are both turned up to extremes. It may be an unstable, ongoing balancing act, with different groups having settled on different genetic compromises. There is no single rule. This is the profound, humbling truth the DNA reveals. Human skin color is not a simple gradient. It is a patchwork quilt of solutions to a complex puzzle. The puzzle pieces are UV radiation intensity, seasonal, sunlight availability, dietary sources of vitamin D and calcium, and the presence of anti-nutrients like phytates. Different groups, in different corners of the world, assembled these pieces in different ways. Some lightened their skin to make more vitamin D. Some maintained darker skin and got their vitamin D from the sea. Some balanced on a knife's edge at the top of the world. And this brings us to the evidence. The concrete, physical proof that this story is written in more than just theory. It's written in bone, in DNA, and in the artifacts our ancestors left behind. The first line of evidence is the darkest and the most direct, ancient DNA. In 2015, scientists sequenced the genome of a 7,000-year-old hunter-gatherer from La Brana, Spain. This man lived long before farming reached Iberia, and his genes told a startling story. He had dark skin, dark hair, blue eyes. The genetic variants for light skin that are nearly universal in modern Europeans were absent in him. This wasn't an isolated case. Genetic data from other ancient Europeans, like the 5,000-year-old Iceman, Otzi, found frozen in the Alps, shows he too had darker skin than modern Europeans, though not as dark as La Brana man. The lightening of skin in Europe was a process that continued long after humans arrived, reaching something close to its modern distribution only in the last few thousand years. The DNA is a clock, and it ticks slowly toward the light. The second piece of evidence comes from the chemistry of starvation. Archaeologists can analyze the bones of ancient people and see the scars of nutritional stress, lines of arrested growth, porous bone lesions, and specific deformities all point to periods of severe deficiency. Studies of early farming communities show a marked increase in these signs compared to their hunter-gatherer predecessors. They were shorter, had more dental defects, and show evidence of anemia. And, critically, bone disorders linked to poor mineral absorption. The skeletal record screams the price of the new diet. Their bodies were literally starving for calcium in a sea of grain. The third proof is in the pottery and the dirt. The story of skin lightening in farming societies is inextricably linked to the story of how they process their food. Fermentation, soaking, and milling, technologies that reduce phytate levels, develop and spread alongside these populations. The adoption of dairy farming in some parts of the world, like Europe and parts of Africa, adds another twist. Lactose tolerance evolved to allow adults to digest milk, a rich source of preformed vitamin D and calcium. This may have actually relaxed the pressure for extremely light skin in some regions, adding another variable to the quilt. The cultural toolkit to mitigate the dietary crisis evolved in tandem with the biological one, which means your skin is a palimpsest, a document written, scraped slightly clean, and written over again by the forces of diet and sunlight. The color on the back of your hand and the pale skin of your inner wrist are not just a suntan map of your own life. They are the echo of a 10,000-year-old famine, a famine of calcium caused by a surplus of grain. They are the signature of a genetic mutation that took hold in a rice paddy or a wheat field because the child of the person who carried it had bones just strong enough to survive a difficult birth. And this forces a completely new perspective. We often think of light skin as an adaptation to weak sun, but for millions of your ancestors across Asia and Europe, it was just as much an adaptation to weak food. It was the body's last-ditch effort to mine the sky for a vitamin it could no longer reliably get from the earth on its plate. It was a biological correction for one of humankind's greatest, most revolutionary mistakes. So the next time you look in the mirror, you're not just seeing a face. You're seeing a deeply personal compromise. You're seeing the ghost of a nutritional crisis that shaped continents. You are seeing the literal embodiment of a question your ancestors never consciously asked, but that their bodies answered with every meal, under every sunrise, for thousands of years. How do we build a skeleton strong enough to survive when the world we're building is taking the very minerals we need to build it? And the answer is written on you, in the gradient from your knuckles to your wrist, in the specific genetic recipe that mixed in your parents, and in theirs, stretching back to a field, or a tundra, or a shore. It is the answer to a desperate, silent plea for calcium, a plea that changed the color of humanity and made you you.